July 3rd, 1942. Parris Island, South Carolina. The summer sun was merciless, beating down on the pale, exhausted figures lined up along the parade grounds. Recruits from across the country, farm boys from Oklahoma, streetwise kids from Brooklyn, sons of steelworkers from Pittsburgh, stood at attention, their khaki uniforms pressed, their boots scuffed from long marches over sand and gravel. Among them, Private First Class Samuel Sam Harlow, 20 years old, tried to keep his expression neutral, but the heat and the shouted orders left him gasping. The drill instructors moved like predators, their voices cutting across the grounds. "You call that a left face? Move like you mean it, maggot." They were men who had seen combat or been shaped by the rigid discipline of pre-war service. They embodied the ethos of the Corps, and their presence alone inspired both fear and grudging respect. Sam's unit had arrived 3 days earlier, processed through the mess hall, given uniforms, rifles, and dog tags. The enlistment bonus had been modest, $50 for 3 years, but it was enough to pay for his mother's electricity and leave something for the younger siblings. Still, the pay was hardly why men joined. Training at Parris Island was a brutal, transformative process designed to strip away civilian habits and forge Marines out of boys. Days began before sunrise with calisthenics, push-ups, sit-ups, squats, running laps across the parade grounds, and sand-filled obstacle courses that left every muscle screaming. After a brief breakfast of eggs and canned coffee, the recruits were herded into classrooms for hours of lectures on rifle maintenance, field sanitation, and military law. If you can't clean your weapon, you don't fire it, the instructors drilled endlessly. The rifle, an M1 Garand, became an extension of the recruit. Sam spent hours learning to disassemble, clean, and reassemble it blindfolded, under duress, and under the threat of punishment if a single piece was out of place. Live fire exercises in the range pits tested marksmanship under stress. Some recruits cracked under the pressure, their hands shaking as they tried to line up sights on distant targets. Sam struggled with his breathing at first, but he learned quickly. The Marines rewarded precision, speed, and composure, traits that would become essential on the front lines. Beyond the rifles and formations, physical endurance was the hammer of training. Beach runs carried through the pounding surf, dragging weighted packs and rifles that forced Marines to adapt to the shock of salt water and sand that burned their skin. One evening, after a 10-mile run in 95-degree heat, the unit collapsed into the sand, each man panting, waterless, half delirious. Sam thought he could feel his lungs tearing with every breath, but he also felt a strange pride. He hadn't quit, and neither had his comrades. The drill instructors circled, barking corrections, but beneath the yelling was a purpose. If you could endure this, you could endure anything. Mess hall food was basic, rationed, and functional. Corned beef hash, powdered eggs, canned beans. But there was camaraderie in standing in line, elbow to elbow, sharing complaints, jokes, and the occasional piece of candy smuggled in from home. Letters were precious, delivered sparingly, and sometimes read aloud by the more vocal recruits, bringing laughter or homesick tears. Paychecks were meager. $21 a month for privates, barely enough for luxuries beyond soap, razor blades, and stamps. But that didn't matter. Discipline, survival, and the promise of something larger than themselves drove men more than money ever could. Combat drills were another transformation. Sam's unit practiced amphibious landings in the surf, wading ashore under simulated fire, crawling through sand and brush, and setting up mock defensive positions. Smoke bombs and blanks fired by instructors created chaos, forcing recruits to improvise and obey instinctively. "Hurry up, Marines. The enemy isn't waiting for your perfection," the instructors yelled. Every mistake cost time, and every lapse in attention could have cost a life in real war. Nights were the hardest. Sleep came in short bursts, punctuated by early reveille or surprise inspections. In the barracks, recruits whispered stories of their homes, sisters, small-town dances, and the movies they missed. Some had girlfriends, some fiancés, some were single, and most didn't dwell on what awaited them overseas. Fear was constant but controlled, a shadow in the corners of consciousness. Sam often stared at the ceiling, listening to the snoring, the coughs, the occasional vomit from exhaustion, and imagined the day he would leave this island for real combat. Medical inspections were frequent and thorough. The Corps was unforgiving about weaknesses: flat feet, poor eyesight, infections, Even minor illnesses could lead to reassignment or discharge. Sam had to pass his physical to the letter. Blood pressure, reflexes, hearing, and vision all tested under clinical scrutiny. Immunizations, prophylactic medications, and meticulous attention to hygiene became part of daily routine. Disease was a silent killer in every theater of war. The Corps instilled habits that were as vital as weapons training. By the 6th week, recruits were no longer boys, they were Marines. Sam could run the obstacle course blindfolded, rifle in hand, shout back commands with precision, and memorize unit formations. The transformation was not just physical, it was mental. A Marine carried a responsibility far larger than himself, and that realization settled into every action, from marching to eating to preparing for deployment. Letters home became terse. "We're fine. Training is hard. I'll write again soon." Parents, siblings, friends seldom understood the intensity of this metamorphosis. The culmination of training was the inspection of combat readiness, including a live-fire amphibious exercise simulating a landing on hostile territory. Boats surged through crashing waves, landing craft unloaded Marines under the crack of blank artillery shells, and instructors judged every movement for correctness, speed, and adherence to protocol. Sam felt the adrenaline spike as he hit the beach, rifle ready, heels sinking into wet sand. It was chaos, but controlled. By the end, exhaustion was complete, but pride followed. Sam had survived Parris Island. He had earned the title of United States Marine. Orders arrived days later. Sam was assigned to the USS Belleau Wood CVL-24, a light aircraft carrier tasked with transporting and supporting Marine squadrons across the Pacific. The ship was already crowded with sailors and airmen, but aboard, Sam saw the next stage of his transformation. Life at sea would be relentless. Drills, watches, mess duty, engine inspections, cleaning, and the constant hum of the engines and propellers. The first taste of salt spray, the rolling decks, and the faint tang of oil and metal would become familiar, almost comforting, in preparation for the unknown dangers ahead. Sam also received his paybooks, gear, and a small allotment of cigarettes, a precious commodity. The first $21 paycheck had been claimed by personal expenses and savings for home, but now he understood that every dollar would be stretched to the limit, supporting not just himself, but sending relief to family back home. There was pride in that small contribution, in knowing that even a private could make a tangible difference. As the Belleau Wood prepared to depart from the Charleston Navy Yard, Sam stood on deck, feeling the heat of the sun on his neck and the vibration of engines through his boots. The Pacific lay ahead, vast, uncertain, and dangerous. He thought of Parris Island, of drill instructors' shouts, of the long nights in the barracks. All of it had prepared him for this moment. Sam didn't know which islands, which battles, which missions awaited, but one truth was certain: he was ready to be a Marine. August 10th, 1942. Off the coast of Charleston, South Carolina. The USS Belleau Wood's engines thrummed like a living beast, vibrating through the steel decks and into the soles of Sam Harlow's boots. The ship, a light aircraft carrier barely large enough to launch Marine fighter squadrons, creaked with age and weight, packed to the rails with supplies, equipment, and men who were still learning to coexist in the claustrophobic ballet of naval life. Life aboard ship was an exercise in discipline and endurance, even before reaching the theater of war. Sam quickly learned the hierarchy. Deck officers barked orders to division leaders, who relayed commands to petty officers, who in turn directed enlisted Marines. Every action was regimented: standing watches, inspecting quarters, scrubbing decks, performing emergency drills. Failure to comply or sloppiness drew reprimands, often loud and public, echoing across the steel corridors like a warning bell. Meals were functional and utilitarian. The mess hall smelled of salt, kerosene, and canned beans. Breakfast often consisted of powdered eggs, fried bacon, and a thick, bitter coffee that had lost its heat by the time it reached the tables. Lunch and dinner alternated between salt beef, canned vegetables, and stale bread. The monotony was punctuated by occasional luxuries: hardtack, chocolate bars, or the occasional fresh fruit sent from port. But scarcity was the rule. Sam quickly learned to ration, to cherish every small morsel, and to trade for whatever little comforts his comrades could spare. Sleep was scarce and fractured. The ship's motion, rolling with the swell of the Atlantic, made rest a test of patience. Hatches and bulkheads vibrated constantly, Engines rumbled beneath, and the occasional crash of wave against hull jolted the sleeping Marines awake. Hammocks swung precariously in close quarters, and snoring, groans, and the occasional bout of seasickness created a symphony of discomfort. Sam learned to sleep with one eye open, body tensed, ready for the next drill or emergency. Training continued even at sea. Marines were drilled in firefighting, damage control, and aircraft handling. The deck could erupt into chaos at any moment. Simulated bombs, fires, or engine failures provided lessons in improvisation under pressure. Sam, once a recruit on Parris Island, now realized that the lessons of discipline, endurance, and observation were magnified in this floating microcosm of war. There was no margin for error at sea. One slip could mean fire, flooding, or worse. The voyage across the Pacific was long and punctuated with unease. Sam spent hours scanning the horizon for enemy submarines or aircraft. Every radar blip, every shadow on the water set the heart racing. The Japanese Navy, unseen but ever present in reports and whispered rumors, was a constant threat. Torpedo boats, reconnaissance planes, and patrol submarines could strike with lethal precision. The men slept with life vests beneath their bunks, rifles at the ready, and eyes alert even during the briefest moments of respite. Onboard routines kept morale and discipline intact. Physical training continued in cramped gym spaces. Squats, pull-ups, and push-ups were performed in shifts around maintenance schedules. The crew participated in general quarters drills multiple times a day, practicing the rapid movement from mess hall to battle stations. Sam learned to react instinctively to the alarm klaxons. Fire stations manned, lifeboats readied, anti-aircraft batteries primed. These drills were monotonous, exhausting, but crucial. In the Pacific, hesitation could mean death. Daily life involved constant maintenance of both the ship and personal equipment. The Belleau Woods steel decks, once polished, became streaked with salt and grime. Marines scrubbed tirelessly, oil and fuel slicks cleaned with sand and soap. Rifles and pistols were stripped and cleaned daily. Even the minutest oversight could render a weapon useless when it was needed most. Sam spent hours on inspections, learning to detect faults in metal, wood, or leather that could spell disaster in combat. Pay remained modest, but functional. Sam's $21 per month as a private was supplemented with small allowances for extra rations or minor personal gear, yet money was largely irrelevant when survival depended on skill, teamwork, and vigilance. Letters from home arrived sporadically, delayed by thousands of miles and logistical bottlenecks. But when they came, they were a lifeline, a connection to the world outside the steel walls and rolling ocean. Evenings were spent in brief respites, cards, whispered conversations, or studying maps of the Pacific theater. Sam pored over charts of Guadalcanal, Midway, and the Solomon Islands, tracing the routes the ship would take, imagining the islands themselves as hotbeds of danger and opportunity. Men talked about the missions ahead, about jungle warfare, amphibious assaults, and the perils of landing on defended beaches. Fear was constant but controlled. Sam noticed how seasoned sailors moved through the ship, alert, calm, and aware of every bulkhead and hatch. The first glimpse of tropical islands was both thrilling and terrifying. The sun rose over distant palm trees and volcanic peaks, painting the water in hues of green and gold. The beaches, white with coral sand, seemed peaceful, but intelligence reports reminded the Marines that behind every grove of trees, every rock could be a machine gun nest or a hidden sniper. Landing operations would test every skill learned on Parris Island and at sea. Sam felt his pulse quicken. Months of training and preparation were about to be tested under fire. Amphibious landing drills continued even en route. Higgins' boats, loaded with Marines and gear, were lowered into the surf and pushed toward the beaches. Smoke, simulated explosions, and shouted commands created chaos meant to harden men against the inevitable confusion of combat. Sam felt the vibration of the landing craft engines beneath him, heard the roar of waves against metal, and tasted the salt spray. The drills were dangerous, and occasionally a recruit fell, twisted an ankle, or was submerged briefly under the surf. But every incident reinforced the unforgiving nature of war. Night watches were relentless. Sam, often assigned to the deck lookout, scanned the horizon with binoculars, listening for the creak of other ships or the faint drone of aircraft. Stars glimmered above, indifferent to the thousands of men below, their lives poised between ocean and sky. Conversations in these watches were hushed, introspective. Men speculated on combat, discussed letters from home, or simply tried to distract themselves from the possibility of death. The Pacific, immense and unending, was as beautiful as it was dangerous. By late August, the Belleau Wood reached its first staging area near the Solomon Islands. Sam watched the green of the jungles, the coral reefs, and the white beaches, absorbing every detail. They were close enough to smell the vegetation carried on the wind, hear the surf crashing, and feel the humidity settle like a second skin. Intelligence briefings outlined Japanese positions, defensive fortifications, and naval patrol schedules. Every detail mattered. Knowledge would be a weapon as critical as any rifle or machine gun. Sam began to feel the weight of responsibility, not just for himself but for his comrades. He was no longer a recruit. He was a Marine, a part of a unit that relied on cohesion, vigilance, and skill. Every step taken on the ship, every drill executed, and every minute of training would feed directly into survival on the beaches and in the jungles ahead. Death was always present, lurking in waves, on ridges, and in the foliage. The Pacific would test them, but it would also teach them the brutal realities of war, endurance, courage, and the limits of human fortitude. September 12th, 1942, Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. The Belleau Wood anchored off Tulagi, the morning sun glinting on the coral reefs and palm-fringed beaches below. Sam Harlow, now hardened by weeks at sea and the relentless routines aboard ship, felt the first gnawing edge of fear tighten in his stomach. The planning briefings had been thorough. Japanese positions, machine gun nests, artillery emplacements, jungle patrol routes, but no amount of maps, diagrams, or lectures could convey the reality of the ground he was about to set foot on. The Marines were loaded into Higgins boats, their rifles slung, packs heavy with ammunition, rations, grenades, and radios. The air reeked of diesel, salt, and fear. Sam glanced at the faces around him, youths and men, hardened or wide-eyed, all trying to mask their apprehension. As the landing craft nosed into the surf, the engines roared, water splashing over the sides, each wave threatening to toss the small vessel like a toy. Sam gripped the rails with white-knuckled hands, his training guiding him. Stabilize, focus, observe, obey. The first wave of fire hit almost immediately. Japanese artillery pounded the beaches. Bullets pinged against metal, and smoke choked the air. Landing craft bounced and collided in the surf, some capsizing under the force of explosions. Sam's heart hammered, but instinct took over. He ducked, kept low, and followed the landing orders drilled into him over months of preparation. The waves sloshed over his knees as he disembarked, boots sinking into coral sand, rifle ready, eyes scanning for movement among the palm trees and rocks. Combat on the beaches was chaotic and visceral. Machine gun fire cut through the air, and grenades exploded in arcs of dirt and shrapnel. Sam learned quickly that the jungle was merciless. Every shadow, every rustle of leaves could conceal an enemy combatant. The training at Parris Island and the drills aboard the Belleau Wood were invaluable. Movement in formation, suppressing instinct to freeze, and always covering a teammate. Marines relied on communication through hand signals, shouted orders, and a grim understanding that hesitation could be fatal. The first night was the worst. The humidity pressed down, sweat-soaked uniforms sticking to skin, and the cries of the wounded mingled with distant artillery. Sleep was impossible, but Sam stole minutes of rest against a tree, rifle clutched to his chest, listening to the jungle's whispering menace. Rats, insects, and the ever-present scent of decay reminded him that survival required more than courage. It demanded endurance, ingenuity, and relentless vigilance. Daily routines were punishing. Patrols extended for miles into dense undergrowth, with the constant threat of ambush or hidden mines. Sam's unit dug foxholes, built defensive positions, and laid barbed wire, often under the hot sun with little water. Rations were sparse, canned corned beef, rice, and chocolate, but every meal, however meager, was fought for and treasured. Disease, heat exhaustion, and dysentery were as lethal as the enemy's bullets. Sam learned to purify water, recognize the symptoms of malaria, and treat minor wounds before they became fatal infections. Night attacks were common. Japanese soldiers moving silently through the underbrush. The Marines had to listen as intently as they fought, distinguishing between a branch snapping and the shuffle of an enemy patrol. Every patrol brought tension. Every misstep could invite death. Sam became attuned to the sounds of the jungle, the distant roar of the surf, the screech of birds startled by gunfire, the faint hiss of snakes slithering unseen through grass. Awareness was survival. Letters home became both solace and torment. Sam wrote briefly about his health, the weather, and the camaraderie of his unit, hiding the horrors he witnessed. Mail arrived sporadically, sometimes weeks delayed, and reading the familiar handwriting of his mother or younger sister reminded him of the world he had left behind, a world untouched by the chaos, fear, and carnage of Guadalcanal. It reinforced the stakes. Survival wasn't just for himself, but for the promise of returning home. The Belleau Wood provided air support, launching Marine fighter squadrons to engage Japanese aircraft or target fortified positions. Sam's unit relied on the synergy between ground and air forces. Reconnaissance planes overhead, smoke signals for artillery, and strafing runs that softened enemy defenses before a ground assault. Coordination was a delicate ballet. Too slow, and Marines were exposed. Too hasty, and friendly fire became a risk. Sam observed pilots diving from above, their engines screaming, and understood that the sky could be just as deadly as the ground below. In the thick of combat, camaraderie became a lifeline. Marines shared water, covered each other during movements, and administered first aid under fire. Sam watched as men he had trained alongside, men whose voices he had heard in the mess hall, were struck down or carried away by comrades. Each loss was immediate and raw, reinforcing the fragility of life. Yet every act of courage inspired the rest. One man holding a machine gun nest, another dragging a wounded friend to cover, or a scout navigating treacherous terrain with near superhuman focus. Sam's nights were haunted by memory, the screams of the wounded, the acrid smell of burning, the cold metallic taste of blood. He learned to compartmentalize, to act decisively despite nausea or fatigue. Fear was not eliminated, it was harnessed. In the jungle, hesitation was a death sentence. Marines who hesitated, who froze, or who abandoned discipline did not survive long. Sam internalized that his training was more than technique. It was the scaffolding that would keep him alive. Pay and provisions were ever-present concerns, though survival overshadowed financial concerns. Each Marine's pay, often sent home to support families, reinforced their responsibility beyond the battlefield. Sam knew that the tiny $21 monthly stipend meant more to his mother than to him, that it was a lifeline in a world he had temporarily left behind. The knowledge sharpened his resolve. Survival was not just self-preservation, but a moral obligation. By late September, the campaign intensified. Japanese reinforcements attempted to break the Marine lines, launching artillery and infantry attacks aimed at recapturing key positions. Sam's unit engaged in brutal close-quarters combat. Bayonets, rifles, and hand grenades became the tools of survival in narrow jungle paths. Blood and sweat coated every surface. The landscape itself became an adversary. Dense foliage, hidden roots, and waterlogged trenches challenged movement and line of sight. Each day was a test of endurance, each skirmish a battle for life. The Marines learned to adapt to the unforgiving environment. Sam observed how the smallest innovations, a well-placed foxhole, a hidden perimeter trap, a silent signaling system, could mean the difference between survival and death. Jungle warfare was not about brute strength alone. It required observation, patience, and cunning. Victory was measured not in glory, but in survival, in the ability to hold ground and maintain cohesion under relentless pressure. Despite the chaos, there were moments of levity, brief respites where Marines traded stories, jokes, or small tokens from home. Sam cherished these moments, the taste of a chocolate bar, the laughter echoing through a foxhole, the shared cigarette between patrols. They were fleeting, but they reminded him that humanity persisted even amid destruction. By the end of the Guadalcanal campaign, Sam had changed profoundly. The boy who had arrived at Parris Island, naive and uncertain, had become a battle-hardened Marine. He understood the costs, the stakes, and the ruthlessness of war. Every drill, every march, every meal of beans and stale bread had prepared him for the reality of combat. He had learned to endure hunger, fear, and exhaustion, to trust his comrades implicitly, to navigate the lethal jungle with discipline and instinct. The campaign was only the beginning. Sam knew that Guadalcanal was a taste of what the Pacific demanded. Other islands, other beaches, and other battles awaited. The Belleau Wood would carry him onward, across thousands of miles of ocean, into encounters that would test everything he had learned. Each mission, each patrol, each landing would forge him further, revealing the limits of endurance, the depths of courage, and the true meaning of being a Marine. November 3rd, 1943, Bougainville, Solomon Islands. The Essex-class aircraft carrier USS Lexington had sailed for weeks across the Pacific, the endless blue horizon offering little reassurance. Sam Harlow leaned against the railing, salt crusting his hair, eyes tracing the wavering line where sea met sky. The carrier was a floating city, alive with the hum of engines, the chatter of sailors, and the constant clatter of steel. Deckhands scurried under the looming shadows of fighter planes, bombs and depth charges secured in racks, and gunners keeping vigilant watch for enemy aircraft. Sam's unit, part of the 1st Marine Division, had spent weeks preparing for the next amphibious assault. The training felt endless: practice landings in mock-up beaches on the deck, swimming drills with full gear, simulated assaults under smoke and gunfire. Every drill, every repetition, drilled muscle memory deep into his bones. Life aboard ship was a mixture of tedium and tension. Marines were confined to crowded quarters, sharing hammocks strung in narrow bunks, the air thick with sweat and diesel fumes. Meals were monotonous: salted meat, powdered eggs, rice, and beans. Fresh fruit was a rarity, and water rationing was strict. Yet Sam found camaraderie in the smallest moments: a shared cigarette, a joke whispered across the mess hall, or the quiet of a night watch when the world seemed suspended over the vast Pacific. Pay was nominal, $21 a month plus extra for combat duty, much of which was sent home to family. But the money seemed irrelevant compared to survival, and letters from home became lifelines, their delayed arrival agonizing but cherished. The journey to Bougainville was punctuated by air raids, Japanese reconnaissance planes probing the formation of Allied vessels. Anti-aircraft gunners aboard the Lexington trained relentlessly, practice turning into necessity as shells screamed into the sky, sometimes finding their targets, often detonating harmlessly in the vast expanse of clouds. Marines were drilled to respond instantly, to man their positions, secure equipment, and prepare for evacuation or assault at a moment's notice. The tension was constant. Landing on Bougainville was chaos in motion. Higgins' boats carried Sam and his comrades across coral reefs into beaches strewn with artillery shells and jagged rocks. Japanese defenders were entrenched, hidden among palm trees, trenches, and dense foliage. The surf hammered the landing craft, tipping them, forcing Marines to leap into water waist-deep under fire. Shouts, explosions, and the crack of rifle fire created a disorienting symphony of violence. Sam's heart raced, instincts honed through months of training, guiding him as he sprinted from the water to the sand, rifle held ready. The jungle beyond the beach was unforgiving. Dense undergrowth slowed movement, obscured lines of sight, and concealed enemy snipers. Sam's unit moved in small, coordinated squads, hand signals and whispered commands guiding them through the foliage. Every fallen tree, every rustle of leaves could conceal a hidden gunner or a booby trap. The Japanese had perfected ambush tactics: grenade pits, camouflage tripwires, and hidden machine gun nests. The first patrol was a brutal education in survival, each man learning to scan constantly, to trust his senses, to anticipate the enemy's next move. Casualties mounted quickly. Marines were struck by gunfire, grenades, and shrapnel. Others succumbed to heat exhaustion, dysentery, or malaria. Sam watched as friends were carried off in silence, their faces pale, lips cracked, eyes wide with disbelief. Field medics moved tirelessly, improvising with limited supplies, stitching wounds, applying bandages soaked in antiseptic, sometimes failing to save lives despite their skill. Every injury reinforced the fragility of life in the Pacific, every close call a reminder of mortality. Supply lines were tenuous. Rations arrived sporadically, often delayed by Japanese naval attacks or rough seas. Marines learned to ration water, improvise with limited food, and scavenge when necessary. Sam discovered that coconuts could be cracked for water, certain roots provided minimal sustenance, and rainwater collected in leaves could be filtered. Hygiene was minimal, diseases spread quickly, and the heat and humidity made every step exhausting. Mosquitoes carried malaria, while dysentery became as much a threat as enemy bullets. Survival required ingenuity as much as courage. Daily routines were grueling. Patrols stretched for miles, each day a test of endurance. Sam's unit alternated between securing defensive positions, clearing jungle trails, and hunting for hidden enemy positions. Night brought another kind of terror. Japanese soldiers conducted infiltrations, silently moving through the undergrowth, forcing Marines to stay alert, listening for the faintest whisper, the faintest movement. Sleep was stolen in brief moments, body pressed against dirt, rifle at the ready. Even in slumber, the mind remained alert, trained to react instantly to the sound of a snapped branch or the hiss of a grenade. Mail was a precious commodity. Letters from home reminded Marines of what they were fighting for, and reading them became a moment of fragile humanity amid the chaos. Sam treasured every word, yet each letter brought a pang of longing, a reminder of the life left behind and the uncertainty of ever returning. Paychecks were secondary, a distant concern overshadowed by the immediate demands of survival and combat. Amid the combat and exhaustion, the bonds between Marines were profound. Sam watched as men risked themselves to carry wounded comrades to safety, sharing water and food, covering each other during firefights. The concept of individual survival faded in favor of collective resilience. One man's hesitation could endanger the entire squad. Trust was absolute, earned through shared suffering and repeated tests of endurance. Combat on Bougainville tested every skill Sam had learned at Parris Island and during the voyages across the Pacific. Jungle fighting demanded navigation, camouflage, coordination, and patience. Artillery support from naval ships and carrier aircraft was vital, softening entrenched enemy positions before ground assaults. Yet the environment was as deadly as the enemy. Swamps, insects, and the constant threat of disease made every step treacherous. By December, after weeks of fighting, Sam understood the full cost of the campaign. The Marines had secured key positions, but at a heavy price. The beaches were scarred with craters, the jungle littered with the dead and dying. The survivors bore the physical and psychological marks of battle, scars, infections, exhaustion, and memories that would never fade. Sam had witnessed acts of bravery, moments of humanity, and the relentless toll of war. The Lexington would carry them onward once more, to new islands, new beaches, new battles. Sam understood that the campaign in the Pacific was a brutal chessboard, each landing a move fraught with peril, each victory tempered by the losses sustained. Training, endurance, camaraderie, and sheer willpower were his lifelines. Each island conquered was a testament to human determination and the relentless machinery of war, a testament to the discipline that transformed raw recruits into battle-hardened Marines. February 19th, 1945. Iwo Jima, Volcano Islands. Sam Harlow's Higgins boat pitched violently against the surf, the roar of naval artillery in the distance competing with the pounding of his own heart. The black volcanic sand stretched out beneath a sky streaked with smoke, dotted with tracer fire and distant explosions. The Marines on board were taut with anticipation, grips tight on rifles, eyes scanning the horizon for movement among the jagged rocks and bunker lines. Months of training, months at sea, months of prior campaigns, Guadalcanal, Bougainville, Tarawa, had honed him into a weapon tempered by fear and discipline. Nothing, however, could prepare him fully for the volcanic hell awaiting on Iwo Jima. The landing was instantaneous chaos. Japanese artillery and mortars ripped through the surf, hitting landing craft and Marines alike. The scent of salt, diesel, and gunpowder mingled with the acrid smoke from exploded shells. Sam flung himself from the Higgins boat into the waist-deep water, boots sinking into volcanic sand, rifle high, following the squad leader's shouted commands over the din. Men fell beside him, screaming or silent, lifeless. He sprinted toward the relative cover of the dunes, diving into craters and shell holes, adrenaline making muscles burn and lungs seize. The island was a labyrinth of tunnels, pillboxes, and camouflaged artillery. Japanese defenders had transformed the volcanic rock into a fortress, knowing the terrain intimately. Each step forward demanded coordination, observation, and instinct. Sam's unit advanced through a maze of jagged rock and coral, tossing grenades into fortified positions, covering one another with suppressive fire, moving in micro-intervals to minimize exposure. Combat was measured in meters. Every inch fought with sweat, blood, and the occasional desperate charge. Casualties mounted immediately. Medics moved with unimaginable courage, carrying the wounded through fire-swept sand, improvising bandages, performing field surgeries, and sometimes failing despite heroic effort. Sam witnessed friends felled by sniper fire, artillery, and booby traps. Each loss reinforced the brutal reality of war. Survival was as much about chance as skill, and luck could be fleeting. The Marines adapted quickly, improvising with local terrain, learning to navigate the labyrinthine defenses, exploiting weaknesses, and maintaining cohesion despite the carnage. Daily routines oscillated between periods of frantic combat and brief, tense moments of rest in foxholes, caves, or cratered sand. Meals were meager, sea rations, powdered eggs, coffee substitute, but consumed with gratitude. Water was rationed strictly, each gulp a reminder of necessity over luxury. Sleep was impossible to schedule, stolen in fits of exhaustion with rifle at the ready. Malaria, dysentery, and heat exhaustion were ever-present threats, sometimes claiming as many lives as enemy fire. Letters from home became sacred relics. Sam read his mother's words aloud to nearby comrades, voices cracking with emotion, humor, and longing. Pay was minimal, but even the knowledge of money sent home reinforced the invisible tether to the world beyond the Pacific, a world untouched by volcanic ash, gunfire, and blood-soaked sand. The Marines relied on each other utterly. Trust was forged not in comfort, but in necessity. One misstep, one hesitation could cost the lives of the entire squad. Night on Iwo Jima was a different kind of horror. Japanese defenders used the darkness to infiltrate positions, launch counterattacks, and plant traps. Marines stayed alert, listening for the faintest whisper, the slightest movement. Sleep was punctuated by dreams of explosions, the cries of the wounded, and the ever-present fear that the next moment could bring death. The jungle was replaced by volcanic rock, yet the same rules applied: vigilance, coordination, and decisive action. In March, the battle shifted to Okinawa, the largest amphibious assault of the Pacific Campaign. The USS Enterprise, part of the carrier group supporting the invasion, launched fighter sorties, naval bombardments, and reconnaissance missions. Sam's unit landed amid tidal waves of artillery, sniper fire, and entrenched positions. Okinawa was a different beast, larger, more fortified, and more desperate defenders. The island's civilian population added layers of complexity as the Marines balanced aggressive combat with efforts to protect non-combatants. Suicide attacks became a constant reality. Kamikaze planes struck ships off the coast, sending columns of fire and debris into the water. Sam watched from the deck of the transport vessels as sailors and Marines scrambled to respond, firefighting crews battling infernos, and the wounded pulled from the water. The psychological toll was immense. No landing or advance could guarantee safety. No tactic could completely counter the unpredictability of enemy desperation. Combat was grueling. Patrols stretched for miles, snipers and artillery targeting every movement. Sam's unit advanced slowly, clearing bunkers, setting charges, and mapping enemy positions. Casualties were high, but discipline, training, and the sheer will to survive drove the Marines forward. Every patrol demanded ingenuity, moving under cover, using terrain for concealment, anticipating ambushes, and maintaining communication across chaotic, fragmented lines. Rations were meager, often interrupted by the demands of constant engagement. Sam scavenged water from local streams, boiled rice from emergency caches, and traded small luxuries among comrades when supplies allowed. Sleep was measured in moments, exhaustion a constant companion. Yet, the bonds of camaraderie were stronger than ever. Marines shared what little they had, covered each other during assaults, and relied on each other instinctively. Trust was absolute, built on months of shared suffering and repeated tests of endurance. The death toll on Okinawa was staggering. Sam counted friends lost, medics overwhelmed, and the wounded piling up. Each act of bravery was a matter of life and death, each moment a choice between hesitation and decisive action. Marines moved forward in disciplined waves, using combined arms, artillery, air support, and naval bombardment to soften enemy positions before assaults. Each success came at a cost. Each victory measured not in glory, but in survival and the ground held. By May 1945, Sam had seen the Pacific War's brutality in its most concentrated form. Guadalcanal had taught him fear, Bougainville, endurance, Iwo Jima, close quarters lethality, Okinawa, the psychological strain of sustained, desperate combat. He understood fully the costs of war, casualties, disease, deprivation, and the constant proximity of death, but also the resilience of the human spirit, the discipline forged by relentless training and the unbreakable bonds of comradeship. Letters home became even more precious, and pay remained secondary to the mission and survival. Sam understood that his actions, his endurance, and his ability to trust and protect his squad were part of a larger machine. The combined might of the United States, the coordination of naval, air, and ground forces, and the relentless drive to defeat a determined enemy. The final days of the war in the Pacific were a mixture of relief, grief, and reflection. Sam watched as cities were bombarded, islands secured, and Japanese resistance waned under the combined pressure of overwhelming force. Yet the human cost was staggering. Thousands of Marines, sailors, and airmen lost, and countless Japanese soldiers and civilians. The toll of sacrifice, courage, and endurance was immense, shaping those who survived in ways that would endure long after the guns fell silent. On the deck of the USS Lexington returning home, Sam finally allowed himself to breathe, feeling the weight of months of combat lift slightly. He looked back toward the islands, had blackened by fire and littered with the dead, and understood the transformation he had undergone. He was no longer the boy from Parris Island, unsure of his place in the world. He was a Marine, forged in fire, shaped by discipline, courage, and the relentless machinery of war. By August 1945, with the Japanese surrender and the war's end, Sam and his comrades returned to the United States. The memories of Guadalcanal, Bougainville, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa were etched into their minds. The beaches, the jungles, the volcanic ash, the heat, the blood, the screams, the camaraderie, the discipline, and the unshakable bond of shared survival. Every letter, every ration, every drill, every step on those islands had prepared them for the unimaginable reality of war. Sam Harlow, like countless Marines, carried the scars of the Pacific, not all visible. He had witnessed the limits of endurance, the depths of courage, and the indomitable will required to survive against an enemy entrenched, desperate, and determined. He had known fear, hunger, exhaustion, and loss, but also valor, solidarity, and the quiet triumphs that came from living through unimaginable adversity. The Pacific War had demanded everything: training, discipline, loyalty, and endurance. For Sam and the Marines of his generation, it had reshaped them irreversibly, leaving a legacy of courage, sacrifice, and unyielding resolve, a testament to the human spirit in the face of relentless adversity.